Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to Coffee with Democrats Ohio. Today is a very special day. Today we have on Mr. David Pepper. He is author of Saving Democracy, a User's Manual for Every American. Also, Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines, both of which have been featured on CNN, MSNBC, C-SPAN, and also publications such as the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and the New York Times, the New Republic, and the New Yorker. David is also the author of 4 novels. The Wall Street Journal has named David one of the best political thriller writers on the scene. David has earned his bachelor's from Yale University and his doctorate from Yale Law School. He's a former elected official in Ohio, served as the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party from 2015 and 2021. He teaches election and voting rights law. Also, I'd like to thank my co-host, Coffee with Democrats Arkansas, Calais. Thank you, Calais, for co-hosting with me today. Everyone, if you could, on the top of your page, you'll see a little arrow. If you could, please hit that button and share this space with all your followers, please. I greatly would appreciate it. During this space, probably not going to be able to take any requests to speak, but if you want to, please, on the bottom right, you'll see that little talk bubble. You please put your questions down there, and we'll try to address any questions that you have during this space. Hi, David.
Hey there. How's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
We are off to a better start than Ron DeSantis was.
Absolutely. Oh my God, what a train wreck that was.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. How's your morning going?
It's good. I'm actually in Boston. I had a really big fun book event last night here. So I'm in Boston, which has been great.
Excellent.
I've been here in a long time.
Oh, I haven't been to Boston. It's a great city.
Yeah.
Love it.
So do you want me to just get started, say a few words, and then open up to questions?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So, first of all, thank you for having this. I was excited to be invited to do this. And, I was in a breakout session for rural Democrats in Oklahoma a few weeks ago, and one of your leaders spoke up there about this. So you guys are everywhere, and that's great. I mentioned I'm in Boston, and what's been really interesting, I've been sort of doing a little book tour. So I've been in breakout sessions with rural Oklahoma county chairs. I've been in, I'll be in Iowa in a few weeks. I was in Boston last night. And I have to say, what's really incredible. So I'm in red states, blue states, purple states. It's amazing to me. And I've been on Zoom calls with West Virginia. I'll be on one tomorrow in Florida. Is how much people are so hungry for a much broader strategy to lift democracy than our typical one. And again, I don't care where I am. It could be a very conservative area, a blue area. People understand that our old fight for democracy of a few swing states for federal positions is just not working. And this is what my books are about. It's basically, if you haven't read the books, they're all about how they kind of are a 1-2 punch. The first one is the Laboratories of Autocracy book is here's the right wing strategy. It's not about Donald Trump, although he's part of it. It's not about Mitch McConnell, although he's part of it. The heart of their strategy is about how they are attacking democracy through the sort of guts of our democracy, which is through our states. And that's where they focus so much of their attention. That's where they're doing most of the damage. That's where they're rigging elections and breaking laws and passing extremism. And the side that cares about democracy for too long has been focused on, important races, but almost to a fault only on those federal swing state races. And that's why it feels like we're losing. It feels like we're winning even when we're losing, because we win these federal races. In the meantime, they're on offense in states crushing us, and we're often not even competing there. It's so bad that not only are they gerrymandered, which is bad enough, but in many states now we don't run for office in half the districts of states. Of course, they're going to win. Of course, they're going to be extremists. The new book is all about, although the first book got into the sum, how do we do, what can we do about it? And I heard a lot of feedback from the first book. We need more about that.
Yeah.
And the good news is, and I'll go to questions. The good news is, once you realize that the battle for democracy is not some faraway battle in a swing state or in a Florida courtroom, but it's actually in your state. You're on the front line. It's happening at your state house. It's happening at your school board. It's a very empowering thing to discover, even though it's sobering. That we don't have to all sit in frustration watching MSNBC or another channel about some battle for democracy far away that we can't do anything about. It's actually right where we are. And the one reason they're winning is because we haven't seen that for so long, that while they're off running in all these state house districts without opposition, we're not even thinking that's a problem. Once you realize it's a problem, it means you can be recruiting to run in that race. You could be, showing up at the school board or the state house committee meeting. All these things are literally right in front of us, and we need to start doing them. The new book is about all the ways to effectively fight that battle. You'll hear in the subtitle, a user's manual for every American. It's literally saying we not only can do these things, we must do them. And there's some really good, passionate people doing them already. And so I walk through all the things that are being done that are actually effective. And by the way, what you're doing here is one of them. But what I love seeing around the country, even from just the last year since the first book came out, is people are really waking up to this. It's why we won the Wisconsin Supreme Court race.
Yeah.
It's why not a single election denier won for Secretary of State in a swing state last November. It's why we started picking up state houses like Pennsylvania and the Minnesota Senate, the Michigan House, in a year where we normally lose all those things because we had the White House, because people are really starting to see it and get involved. And right now, since I'm on a coffee with Democrats Ohio, you guys would love to hear how much folks all over are fired up to help us defeat issue one in Ohio in August. There were people here in Boston last night. They're already doing phone banks to Ohioans about it, which is amazing.
Great.
And what they're finding is that nobody knows about it, which is the reality. So every phone bank, every postcard, all of that from anywhere is helping. So there's this army for democracy that thinks building, and it understands the battle we have to fight, and it's working on. So that I'll just stop there. But I'm excited to see this and happy to sort of have a conversation about all this stuff going forward.
That's amazing, David. Wow, so much to unpack there. Couple questions to start diving in here. Just a basic one to get kind of everyone's feeling on this is, what exactly is your definition of what a Democrat is?
That's a good question. I think right now, I think it clearly is, there's sort of a progressive set of things that we generally are for, but I think right now it's a little broader, small d. Let's go with small d. And I think there are ways that this needs to include independence. And frankly, there are some Republicans who, although it's unfortunately a small number, who are appalled by the attack on democracy. And to the extent they exist, we need to embrace them. But I think right now we need to be looking for a core belief that the people in the end, through a healthy democratic process, should be in charge of the direction of states and more broadly our country. And I think the what's happening overall, and I go through this in great detail in the new book, the far right knows very well that they represent a minority worldview, a toxic worldview on many issues such as abortion bans, no exceptions, crazy gun laws. They know that's deeply unpopular, and they refuse to accept that the majority doesn't agree with them. They know the majority doesn't agree with them, but they refuse to accept that outcome. And that's why a whole lot of us, have kind of taken for granted that democracy is the way we should run things, a fair, healthy, robust turnout, results reflecting generally that majority. They just simply don't agree with that. They are so threatened by a majority that is hostile to their agenda. They clearly have made the decision. This is why they study Viktor Orban.
Mhm.
This is why they study other things, admire certain folks that we should be admiring. How can they lock in a minority worldview over time that would lose in a healthy democracy? That's why they've chosen state houses as sort of their weapon of choice, because that's where you can do that. Right now, I would say Democrat, this is a very broad definition, are all the people who think that's terrible. It's people who think that actually the majority of this country should be reflected in how we govern, and generally, not every time, but how our policies are shaped. It should reflect how the people feel. And that's why in Ohio, we are so offended that they know that a majority of Ohioans are pro choice. They see that coming. And so they're trying to change the Constitution to keep that majority will from being expressed in Ohio law. And the reason they gerrymander is they know the same thing. They know they couldn't do what they're doing in a world of fair districts because they know the majority oppose them. So I think at this point, I hate to say it, it's pretty fundamental. And now we can get into what the parties stand for and all the platforms. But I think we're at a point now where it's everyone who thinks that the fundamentals of a healthy democracy and the rule of law should be respected versus those who literally their entire political agenda is to undermine democracy, to lock in a worldview that they know the majority don't agree with. That's the current battle.
That's really good. Yeah, and you're definitely right. Um, the fight to protect our democracy is 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 tougher now than ever, especially with such division, and the splintering off in our party. Um, and here in Ohio, you mentioned issue one. Um, with issue one, um, what prompted issue one?
I think obviously in the very short term, I'm just tweeting out for people to join us.
Sure.
In the very, by the way, I love, even though it didn't work well for Ron DeSantis, I love conversations on Spaces. They seem pretty accessible to folks. Um, Issue one is basically, it is the legal admission about their overall strategy. Let's be clear. They know that their positions, for the most part, like that horrific story of the 10-year-old rape victim
Mm,
going to Indiana, they know that that is not what Ohioans believe. And they know more broadly that all the giveaways to the private school operators taking money from public schools, they know all of that is against what most people want. And issue one is literally, I'll get the specifics, but it is the reality check that they know that they are in the minority. And so the way you protect yourself, they're already protected through gerrymandering.
mm,
They're already feeling pretty safe because they rigged the rules of how we elect Supreme Court justices after Democrats succeeded in creating a fair court. Of course, they changed the rules.
mhm.
But now their biggest threat to their right wing minority agenda are the people themselves changing the Constitution. So they seek out any threat to their account. They seek out any threat to their power, and they worry about any level of accountability. That's where they're freaking out about the indictment, Donald Trump. It's accountability. They're so not used to accountability. Even when half of them admit he broke the law, they're both siding it, but they're not saying he didn't break the law. But accountability for them is it's like their kryptonite. Well, for them in Ohio, the fear they have is not the Ohio Supreme Court. It's not elections for state house because they've rigged those. It's the people changing the Constitution directly. That's the last threat to their power. And they clearly have thought about this for a while. And by the way, this is happening around the country. This is a threat all over. That they get so extreme that people themselves will finally say, screw this, we're changing the Constitution. And what made it urgent for them is we all started gathering, and some wonderful groups coming together, started gathering signatures for this November to do what Kansas did, a referendum to protect abortion access. And that's what's kickstarted them from going from like, hey, we'd love to do this someday to, oh my God, we have to do it now. And here's the little trick if you're not from Ohio. If they change the Constitution threshold to be 60% this November or later, and we have already succeeded in locking in abortion access in the Constitution this November, that means to undo that, they would have to get 60%. That's why they have to break the law to make it an August special election. If
Mhm.
they don't get ahead of it for November, then they're the ones who have to overturn it with 60%. And their urgency is an admission of how hard that would be. They know it would never happen. So they're the ones who, because we started gathering signatures to protect choice, they literally are, and you all know this if you're from Ohio, they passed a law months ago saying no special elections in August.
Right.
They never rescinded that law
Yep.
because they didn't have the votes, yet they passed a resolution to demand an August election that they made illegal. This is an illegal election.
Yep.
And they had to make it illegal. They had to do it in August because if not, they'd have to live by the very rule they passed, which means they could never undo an abortion protection amendment that we think would pass this November. So the irony is they're already showing us that they wouldn't be that they are afraid of their own rule. That's why they had to pass this beforehand
Exactly.
because they wouldn't be able to undo it. So
And-
that's why, by the way, again, if you're not from Ohio, they're doing it in August because they know no one's paying attention. They're counting on low voter turnout.
Yep.
So there's the risk of that, but there's also an opportunity. They tried that in Kansas, and the pro-choice side got so fired up it crushed it. And it took advantage of the low turnout to crush it. That's what we have to do. We have to crush it. And think of this, if you're beyond Ohio, this is the next fight that was the fight in Kansas in August last year. Then we had a midterm where we stopped election deniers in every swing state running for Secretary of State. Then we had a Wisconsin Supreme Court race we all got fired about. This is the next one. Get fired about that. And then where are we going to go next? Virginia. Win the state house back. We can win it this November. So it's a rolling battle. And we used to only think about swing U.S. Senate races. Now we need to be smart to realize, well, the next battle isn't a Senate race somewhere. It's not reelecting Sherrod Brown. It's stopping this horrific attack on democracy in Ohio in August.
Yeah, David. You know, it's very clear from what you said when Republicans are afraid. But the people that they're afraid of are the people that elected them into office.
Exactly.
They're afraid of the people. They're not afraid of the donations that they accept. So
yeah, they are deathly afraid of the people. The intention, again, they show us what they're afraid of when they freak out and when they break the law. In Ohio, they broke the law 7 different times to gerrymander an already gerrymandered system. That's how afraid of the people they are. If they were in fair districts,
yeah,
you and I could, if you give me a fair district and one of those bozos voted for, which they all did, the abortion ban that, well, not all of them, but because it was a couple years ago, but a lot of them did.
Yeah.
The abortion ban that sent that 10-year-old rape victim to Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
We would crush them in any fair district. That would be the end. Look at Kansas.
Yeah.
Look at Fetterman beating Mehmet Oz.
Yeah.
Because Mehmet Oz said abortion should come down
Yeah.
to a doctor, a woman, and her local elected official. That was the end of him.
Mm.
So they are deathly afraid of the voters. That's why they gerrymander. That's why they did it again in 21. Their records are indefensible. They're too extreme, and the outcomes they generate. And you mentioned the donors.
Yeah.
What is their MO in these state houses? Giving donors our stuff.
Yeah.
Take the public assets like public school funds and fork it over to a private player. And so here's the other problem for them. That's why they're afraid of the voters. Their records can't be defended. Their towns are dying. The streets are falling apart. The schools are being defunded. You know, in Ohio, in Texas, the energy grid is collapsing. They cannot defend their records. So yes, they're deathly afraid of the people. And they've given away so much of what belongs to us in Ohio. It's the energy scandal, obviously. They give away our public goods to the private players, and they have to protect themselves and the people so they can keep doing it. And by the way, this is one reason why the interest groups like the Ohio Chamber support issue one, is because they get ahead in the world that's currently happening, and they also don't want the people to stop it. So the private players who benefit from the system also don't want the people involved because we don't like what they're doing. So yeah, they're very afraid of it, and whether it's changing the Constitution or gerrymandering, they show, especially when they're willing to break the law repeatedly, which they are doing. That is how desperate they are to keep the people out of their. And as you say, the irony is they're supposed to be, quote, elected officials. But for the most part, these are people who've never in their lives, since the first primary they won, ever been in a real election. So they're scared of the people. And many of them, more so in other states in Ohio, though Ohio's to some degree, they don't have competition in November elections, like no opponent whatsoever.
No.
So the idea of a person knocking on doors in their neighborhood, which we need to do in every district of every state, saying, "Hey, your neighbor, that state rep who looks so nice in the parade, is a total extremist, and you need to know that." And that person is the reason you have 4 days of school a week. It's not because of a caravan from Mexico. It's because of your state rep defunding schools.
Yeah.
We don't run in these places, so no one hears that, and so they fall for the nonsense that it's coming from somewhere else. The problem is the state houses, and so they are deathly afraid of people actually figuring it all out. And they fight. You're on the right track when they fight harder. They fight harder when they're scared. You see this with the Trump indictment right now. If they're fighting harder, it means you're onto something. And that's why the 60% thing shows you how fearful they are of this amendment that we could vote on November.
Absolutely. Kelly, you had a question.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, David, we're seeing the same thing here in Arkansas. We do have a citizens veto referendum going through to put our new Learns Act, it's the education bill that is just massive. It was 145 pages of mostly nonsense. A lot of, public money going into these private schools and charter schools. And they, in addition to that, did change the process. And they put an emergency clause on that bill with ours, changing it from us needing 15 counties to now needing 50.
Oh,
And they put that on the ballot twice, and voters voted it down. We didn't want it.
You're our
and they
hero.
put
We
it
always
anyway.
cite you guys.
Oh, thank you. It is. We have an uphill battle. We just last week got the approval from the AG for the ballot title, so now we can collect signatures. We are hitting the ground running, trying to get all of those signatures. We're trying to get double what we need.
When
so that
would
we
this be?
can
This
ensure
November?
It would be in November 2024.
Okay, that's great to know because I'm here to help. I'd
We
love to have
appreciate
a
it.
straight up or down vote on this kind of thing.
Yes, we want people to be able to vote on whether
Yeah.
or not they want this Learns Act to be implemented. Um, Unfortunately, session ended the 1st of May, and that's when we submitted our paperwork. That's when the clock started. So we only have until the 31st of July to get all of the signatures needed.
Oh my God. How many do you need?
We're aiming for in the upper 90, like 97,000.
Oh, that's not that many. Good. You can get that.
Not that many, but we have a non-voting state. We had 25% of registered voters actually come out to the polls in the midterms. And when you talk about, Republicans winning their elections, we had, I can't remember the number, but the majority of them just walked right into office. They had no competition at all. So that's
Yeah, I have a chart in my book because I got so obsessed with this after Tennessee. I added it. You look like you had 52% of the seats in Arkansas last time did not have a Democrat run, and 43% of the GOP reps didn't have any opponent, Democrat or independent. So yeah, you're right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
That's almost 1,300,000 Arkansans who did not have a choice. for the very office that determines how their kids are taught and how democracy is shaped. It's a crisis everywhere.
It is.
By the way, I'm obsessed with the idea. I don't know all the details of your education bill, but in the last 3 months, Republican rural representatives in Texas and Georgia stopped the kind of bill you're dealing with because they realized, and I think they knew they couldn't defend it, that especially rural schools are being crushed by
Yes.
all this privatization. And you know this, and I'm from more of a suburban Ohio. My wife's from a tiny town though, about an hour from Cincinnati, 1,000 people. You get rid of North Adams High School in Adams County, Ohio, and you just destroyed the whole community. And so I actually would love to see the results of yours of what you're doing, because I think one of the hidden issues in politics right now is if we can show that their right-wing school giveaways destroy the communities of rural public schools. I think it's a really good issue in places that we have not competed in for a long time. And that's why those rural Republicans abandoned Governor, what's his name, Abbott and Kemp in Georgia and Texas, and teamed up with Democrats to stop these things. And my hope is maybe in Arkansas, you can get some real fire in rural parts of the state because they'll see a threat to their rural schools. And in those areas, there's no choice to go somewhere else. That's the school. Everyone's part of it. And if you get rid of it, there's nothing left.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Earlier in the year, I think it was about February, I put out a tweet with the Rural Caucus of Arkansas, and we listed all of the schools that are at risk of consolidation. We had a lot of schools that were consolidated under Governor Huckabee, not Sarah, but her dad. Can't remember his name at the top of my head right now,
Right.
but a lot of schools were consolidated back in early 2000s, and it's almost like it's a family business of theirs now that she's in office. We're seeing already some schools that are starting to talk about consolidating because they just cannot afford to continue to run. They have a law of how many children have to be in that district and attending those schools before they consolidate. And then this new bill comes in and allows charter schools to take them over. So we're
Oh,
also seeing that. And there's a lawsuit right now that's in the works with that because there's a charter school trying to take over the public school district at the moment.
yeah. And let me just be clear. And I don't want to throw every single nonprofit charter around the country under the bus, but for the most part, when you see a massive effort around the country on one issue, and let me give you a story in Ohio that should scare everybody. When they started screwing around with Ohio schools and giving the money away to especially the for-profit industries, this was like 12, 14 years ago. Ohio had the 5th ranked public schools in the nation. It was one of our great strengths. Now we're in the mid 20s, meaning we've had a downward spiral in the quality of our public schools as they've given money to so much worse performing private charters and for-profit online scams, which turned into total scams. But they keep doing it. They keep giving it in the direction that's leading to the worst result, which is the clue that this isn't about public outcomes for them. This is not about improving education. It's about whoever is making the money on the other side. And so whenever you see these sort of broader pushes, and this is true with gun laws as well, I'm afraid, whenever something doesn't make sense because the public outcomes get worse, our states are getting more violent, our schools are getting worse, and they keep doing the same thing. I wouldn't have said this 15 years ago. I'm guaranteeing you it's because someone's making money behind it all. So the outcome that they are seeking money is being served, so they keep it going. The public outcome, which we think they care about, they just don't care about that. They're in offices where they don't worry about the public because they're gerrymandered. They don't have opposition. So they're just giving away our stuff, like I said, to companies, and the public outcomes be damned. In Ohio, again, we fell from 5th to 26th. The new Senate budget is doubling down on all that stuff, just like the bill you have in Arkansas. It's all about money for these people.
So, David, just to close the August 8th special election, just to sum it up for issue one, the 60% threshold that the GOP is kind of pressing down and suppressing, the will of Ohioans in the Constitution, all because of they're afraid of the pro-choice movement, when right now the Ohio Constitution says it's based off of a simple majority of 50% plus one.
Right.
This is all the reason, correct?
Yeah, they know, they know that the truth is a referendum on abortion access will pass almost anywhere. I mean, Kentucky passed one, Kansas. In Ohio, the number in most polls is 59 to 60%. They know it would pass, and they know that their agenda is not a majority agenda. So yeah, this is one other way to rig the system, which is their entire goal. Use state houses to rig democracy so they can put into place views that would never survive a robust democracy. This is really, it's terrible, and we got to stop it. But in one way, it's kind of helpful. It's sort of showing the world what they really think. Because when I wrote this book, Laboratories of Autocracy, and I started saying worldview, you would have all said, yeah, we see that. A lot of people are like, David, that's too much. You can't, you really believe that? And now I'm like, well, look at issue one in Ohio. They're trying to make it the law. Look at what they tried to do in Arkansas. That was what they were doing. So it actually, as bad as it is, and we have to stop it, it actually is sort of an admission of guilt that, yes, indeed, they want 41% of Ohioans to be able to stop 59% of us from actually having our will reflected in the Ohio Constitution, or to stop the very terrible things that state house will do because they're gerrymandered.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the biggest issue right now that is pressing all over social media, everywhere you look.
Yeah,
that's Facebook.
And by the way, there are ways that if you're from beyond Ohio, and we should work on this, the Ohio folks, there are ways to help. And if you're somewhere in beyond Ohio and you have a group of activists, DM me. My DMs are always open, which I learned a year ago was a really good way to hear from folks. If you have a group that does, phone banking or postcarding, DM me and I will connect you to the campaign, because every phone call in this race, and of course you always want people from Ohio making calls, but I don't care. If you're calling from anywhere, you're going to be calling Democrats to make sure they know about this. And if they show up, we win. So anyone who wants to help, let me know.
That's great. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And then also, Kelly put down in the chat links to the website, votenoinaugust.org.
Perfect.
Yeah. So that way they can go to the website, find out more information, voting information for the August special election, and also a list of all the organizations, companies that oppose this Q1. It's quite extensive. So,
yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You guys know the Libertarian Party came out against it. John Kasich, who, if you're from Ohio, was pretty right winger as a governor. He's against it. So it's it's the kind of coalition that, if it comes together and works hard, can crush the thing.
Yeah. Several former governors.
Taft, Kasich. And by the way, I really am fascinated. I can't remember her name now, but from Arkansas, keep us posted on that. I would love to get that on the ballot. And I think there's a huge opportunity to make that a real centerpiece as they try and attack schools everywhere.
Kelly, Uh,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah. Sure, David, Kelly will DM you.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
great. Um, David, with gerrymandering, with last week's Supreme Court ruling 5-4, in Allen v. Milligan, how will it impact voters with the 2024 general election?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you there? It is it's a great example why you don't stop fighting ever. That I teach these courses and cases in law school. I teach voting rights. I was pretty sure that case was going to go the other way. This was the really important case. We're all focused on Moore v. Harper, which could come out any day now, which is very scary. But I worried that this case was going to get lost as being not quite as scary as Moore v. Harper. But if this case had gone the other way, basically everywhere, and this case happens to be out of Alabama, and it's also there's litigation right now out of Georgia and Louisiana and South Carolina. Basically, Alabama violated the only thing right now that you're not allowed to do in gerrymandering is split up majority minority black districts so that they no longer have representation. That's been the one clear rule of the Voting Rights Act that had not been gotten rid of. And Alabama took what clearly should have been two majority black districts and they made it into one. And they defended it at the Supreme Court of the United States, saying, "Well, that old rule shouldn't apply anymore." Just like the Shelby County case destroyed the Voting Rights Act. And I, having seen Roberts over the years and Thomas, I thought that as horrible as their argument is, as counter to precedent as it was, I thought they're going to win. And if they had won, not only would current districts in Georgia and Alabama and other states that are currently exist be upheld, and one of the only reasons they have the House majority is because of districts where they did this, it would have invited them to do it more and more. And so, to your question, John, to their credit, John Roberts and Kavanaugh said, no, we're going to stick by that old rule, and you probably broke it. Now, there's more litigation to come, but we are not getting rid of that rule, which was a shock for those of us who watched this court. And that means there is a very good chance. Now, it'll all be about the timing, if it gets worked out in court in enough time. But there is a chance that even in 2024, there will be at least three, if not more, Democratic districts that are going to be created that are currently Republican districts, because it's probably going to be found that they broke the Voting Rights Act in each of the Alabama, Louisiana, I think Georgia again, and potentially South Carolina, in each of those states. So it could impact the majority. I mean, and I know we have some New Yorkers on the call. If we can win back the New York districts that we should never have lost, but we had really low turnout, and we have these districts flipping Democrat because the current districts are found to be illegal, and we do better in some other districts, this is clearly a big piece of winning back the House. But longer term, what I tell you is it's much bigger than 24, although it has a real impact on 24. Beyond 24, it means that what would have been a whole new cynical round of splitting up black communities across this country will not happen. So long term, it's a big win, and it was a real threat because I told you they are always trying to further rig it. They're always trying to further gerrymander. This would have given them a way to do that, and now it's cut off. So that was a huge victory. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important, and it was shocking, but shocking in a good way. And yeah, you still have the other case to come out.
Yeah, and here's my worry. Just to be, I never get too excited about victories because you got to you celebrate for a day, you keep going.
Yeah.
In the last 10 years, there's a big there's a win that feels, and also there's much bigger strategy for democracy. I actually thought this time because the Morphy Harper case, the one from North Carolina, is this independent state legislature theory. It's literally a theory that a state legislature used by a court about elections or gerrymandering. It's a totally rogue, outrageous argument that would basically mean in places like Ohio, true lawlessness. Like the legislature does what it wants. I always thought, well, that case is so crazy, they'll vote against that one and they'll be okay with the Alabama one. So, of course, now I will celebrate big time if Moore v. Harper, as it should, goes down. If I really worry, though, that if Moore v. Harper passes and somehow they defend it, which would be just horrible, that even though we won that one, we're losing more than we're winning net. But let's all hope that it doesn't go that way. The only optimistic side is if they didn't buy the BS argument for Alabama, they really should buy the BS argument for North Carolina. But we can do another call down the road. If we win both those cases, then we actually have had a pretty good year, at least around things like districts and state houses, despite some terrible decisions on other issues.
Yeah. David, while we're still talking about elections, for unopposed seats and incumbents, for someone who wants to possibly run against an incumbent, what is your best piece of advice for someone who wants to run against an incumbent that's been in that seat for quite some time?
That's a great question. First of all, if you were thinking that, wonderful. We need, and I go through examples in the book of people who just were so frustrated they stepped up and ran. But they did say to me, and as I interviewed them for the book, where I did it, I had no idea what to do, and nobody told me. And so there are a couple organizations out there nationally that are doing a great job. One is called Run for Something. Look, and I give all the links to this in my book. They're recruiting and trying to help people run. So Run for Something, contest every race. I'd call your county party or your state party. I'd call your Democratic caucus. They are obviously mainly focused on the swing districts. So often they're not doing as much as I wish they would do in these harder districts. But if you show up and say, hey, I'm willing to run in this hard district, they may not give you, a 5 or 6 figure check that day or ever. But unless they're really got a problem, and if they do call me, they shouldn't be against you running. They should welcome it. You've just solved a problem they maybe would have never solved if you're running in a district that no one's run in for a while. So I'd call the local Democratic the county. I'd call the House caucus who has an interest in running. I'd call the national group. I'd call the state Democratic Party. But I also think look for the kinds of trainings that there's someone called Run for Something. There is a operation called Arena. Arena trains campaign staff. So if you're running, call them up and say, hey, is there any way, are you guys bringing staff to my state? I want to get in line. The answer may be yes, maybe no. But there are resources out there about doing all this. And a lot of state parties will have the training, even if they're not recruiting as heavily as I'd like in some of these areas. If you sign up as a candidate, some of them at least will have training. So I would say there are organizations out there, but the further you are into an area that no one's run in, the less likely that they're actively recruiting. So, by the way, let me be very clear about one thing: running isn't for everybody. And so if you want to run, amazing. You're a hero, especially the harder the district you're in, the more you are a hero for running. And thank you for thinking about it. Thank you for doing it. Even if you never win that race, you're running alone is an act of public service that is hugely important to bring accountability to extremism. But if you can't run, I have a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old. Right now would not be a great time for me to run. And I love running. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't yourself in your mind. If you're in a district where no one has run in a long time and you know that, And if you can't run, don't just walk away. Think to yourself, who is my most impressive friend that can run? Do I know a 25-year teacher who everyone took their history class at the local school? Do I know the firefighter who's been working the community for years? A nurse who's served folks? So don't just, if you can't run, don't just have that be the end of the conversation. Think about someone who can. And the group, take collective ownership over the fact that by the deadline, which will mainly be in early next year, unless you're like Virginia or something where you have elections this year, that by that deadline, you all commit one of us is going to run. We are not going to ever again let the extremists in the state house go through an election without someone calling them out for their extremism and talking about the fact that the schools are falling apart or the roads are falling apart. So one of you should run and all of you should own together the mission that by that deadline, we're going to get somebody.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to make sure that every seat, it doesn't matter if it's school board, city council, or your garbage man, but every single seat, doesn't go unopposed. So,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah.
And by the way, there are some states, this is really important. Some states, believe it or not, and Pennsylvania is one of them, you run for elections officials
Oh
positions.
my God.
And many times those aren't being run for. Well, Steve Bannon is recruiting people to run for them. So school board's so critical. That's one of the frontline offices right now because of all the book banning for democracy. But in some states, and you'll know the states when you're in them, elections officials themselves at the local level are elected. Make sure you have good people running for every one of those to stand to be counted when they start trying to deny elections next year.
David, with all of your, your experience, your profession, when you were growing up, you have worked with quite a lot of, leaders like Henry Kissinger, a lot of ambassadors before, President Putin was, he was vice admiral in St. Petersburg. Um, you know, what inspired you to work in politics?
You got to really scare people about me with that sort of release of my deep dark
Sorry.
secrets. So just so everyone knows, in the early '90s, I actually worked in Russia. This was back before the current days. We were trying to work after the end of the Cold War with Russia when Clinton and Yeltsin got along well to bring technical assistance and help St. Petersburg. So this is when we got along well. I was 23 years old working on a commission that was trying to help the city of St. Petersburg. And yes, in that work, I did have a lot of kind of, if you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, it's like when he's all in all these scenes with these famous people and doesn't know it. The guy who was the vice mayor of St. Petersburg when I was working there was Vladimir Putin. And so I used to have meetings with him when he was this like 38-year-old vice mayor. And as you said, Kissinger was part of it. So I don't want anyone to think I've been meeting with Putin lately, but in this very strange twist of fate, when I thought I was going to do international work my whole life, I did happen to be doing all that. And what's sad for me, and this is going to sound, I don't want to over dramatize it, but when I was in Russia, in St. Petersburg, a wonderful city, it was this time where we thought they were heading towards democracy.
Mm.
And the people we were working with, Putin was an exception, but the mayor of St. Petersburg wrote their constitution. He was a small d democracy hero. He stood up against the coup. And the people I met in Russia at the time were very sort of positive about moving towards democracy. And what's sad about what's happening, and obviously it's awful about Ukraine, what's sad is the lesson is, and this is true in Hungary, and now it's true in some American states, people who have an intention to destroy democracy, if they get their hands on certain levers, can do it. And Russia is an extreme degree. But when I was in Russia in those years, there was newspapers everywhere about different viewpoints. There were many political parties. It was sort of an explosion of it was in its birth, so it was flawed, but there was this push to try and bring democracy. And for a few years there was this effort, and I was trying to be part of it. And it shows you that it's not automatic. In this case, you went from what was the beginning of a democracy to corruption, and now a complete meltdown into a disaster. And Orban in Hungary is a more subtle story about the same thing. It's We have been living in America since the 60s with the Voting Rights Act, in this sort of very privileged time that we've kind of thought for too long, oh, democracy is some magical thing. It's here no matter what. It's not going away. And it really can't be threatened. And Russia is an extreme example. Hungary, a more recent example that's more like the typical course. When someone starts to come up with a way to gerrymander a place so that elections lead to no account, I'm sorry, that districts lead to zero accountability, and then courts get sort of hijacked, so they're not really a place of accountability, and you start changing the Constitution so the people have no safety valve when they don't agree with it, you can lose your democracy when those things start to happen. And just because we're in America and we think that we're some magical sort of bubble where democracy is just there no matter what, that's also not true. And our past is not that. Look at all the years of struggle, not just in the South, but everywhere for a full democracy. And we can go through and fall like other places if we're not careful. And when I go back and think about what I experienced in positive time in Russia versus now, like it's the starkest example of how an effort to build democracy or to strengthen it can, with only a few years, turn into a total downward spiral in the way we've seen it there.
That's great.
I think it really goes to show just how quickly you can lose it, and how it we have taken advantage of it for so long. We've gotten comfortable just assuming and expecting that these rights would be in place all the time, and we're seeing now that that's not the case. And it takes us actively engaging every election to keep it going.
Absolutely. And one thing, there was one thing you said earlier that I actually don't agree with. I think you'll see why. It feels hard right now because the effort against it is so aggressive. And we haven't, and they have a huge head start. But let's go back before the 60s. Think about John Lewis. And I start my new book with my great 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 grandmother, who was at Seneca Falls, the suffragists.
Yeah.
They fought for democracy when there wasn't either party for it. Winning elections for them didn't even get the job done because it kind of didn't matter who won. Neither one of them wanted a full democracy. So they understood, like you just said, that it's a long battle. It's a never-ending battle. But the truth is, we are in a much better place to win our battle for democracy than they were, and they won it through years of struggle. So we are in a tougher place than we were 15 years ago. What they've done in our states is set us back. What's happening in the Supreme Court is a challenge. But whenever you think, because I hear all the time, and I get when you read my first book, why people ask this, well, isn't it too late? Haven't we lost? And the answer is we only lose if we stop fighting or if we don't figure out that we're in the fight that we're in. But other people have overcome far more to build the democracy we inherited than we have to overcome now. It is difficult. They have set up real rigged systems that we're going to fight to overcome in Arkansas, in Ohio, in Oklahoma, where I was last week. But don't think that we can't do it. And if you need inspiration, look at all the people who came before us who did it with a far harder circumstance than we face. When neither party, they had to do it separate from elections, because for the most part, elections wouldn't solve their problem because neither party really stood with them.
Absolutely. You're so right. You know, the the fight for our democracy, it goes on, but before it goes earlier on.
Oh yeah, this is the same history we are no diff. We are in the same struggle that we've always
Yeah,
been in. And if some of what's happening provided a wake up call to that reality, that's at least one healthy consequence. That the idea that we're magically, we're somehow in a different place than our predecessors who had to fight for democracy. We're not.
right.
And the clearer we see that, the more effective we will be.
And this is why more than ever, we need more people to speak up, speak out, and fight for our democracy, because there are so many people out there spreading misinformation and trying to topple our democracy.
Yeah.
So,
And by the way, let me say one
yeah,
thing. I assume we run an hour, right?
yes,
Yeah. So I wrote this new book as fast as I could because I'm optimistic about the near term, although it's a long game. As I said early on, they have been working feverishly to hide how extreme they are from the American people, because that extremism is going to cost them elections. That's why Mitch McConnell told Lindsey Graham, don't bring up a national abortion ban. That's why they shouted down Joe Biden at the State of the Union when he brought up Social Security. They don't want America to see how extreme they are, but here's the bad news for them. It's too late. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the face of Congress. DeSantis and Trump will be the Republican debate stage. They can't hide their extremism. And when America sees how extreme they are, we generally win because it's too much. That's why all those election deniers lost in 22. The other thing that's happening that makes me optimistic is we won a bunch of races in 22 in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. We normally don't win, partly because they're too extreme, and partly because the infrastructure and activism is growing in the right places, like helping state house candidates, like recruiting in places we haven't recruited. That led to victories in Michigan and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and other places that in 22 that countered 50 years of history where we don't win in the year where we have the White House. So if we keep building from those successes and we highlight their extremism at all levels, not just for the presidency, but all the way down, I think 23 and 24 can be some really awesome years, not just to win some federal elections, but to actually make progress for democracy. So channel your energy. And that's why I wrote this book, like just saying to people who don't know what to do, we have momentum right now. As bad as it feels on things that really matter, we have momentum. Let's build on it. Let's build on the infrastructure that's beginning in many places. Let's expose their extremism at all levels. And if we do all that, I actually think we can keep a little bit of a winning streak going through 23, through the August special in Ohio, through the Virginia races in November, and keep on moving into 24 and do it everywhere. But that's why we need people on the ballot everywhere to take advantage of this moment.
absolutely. David, you have me inspired. You have me pumped. I'm ready to go start my day and start marching on. This has been a fantastic space. Definitely, I'm raring to go. Everyone, please, up in the nest, there's a link. Please go to Amazon to purchase David's book, Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American. Also, you can find David's book, Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. Also, here at Coffees with Democrat, we are ever expanding. We have Coffees with Democrat here in Ohio, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Florida, and Connecticut. We are expanding. So if you in your local state would like to host a Coffee with Democrat, please feel free to reach out to one of us and we'll make you with the correct information. But thank you very much for participating today, listening in. This is recorded, so you can feel free to share. If you have any questions, please feel free to DM us. Thank you very much for sharing our morning with you. David, thank you very much for your time today. This
Of
has been
course.
fun. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to spending another morning with you next time. And also, I want to let everyone know June 30th at 10 a.m. I'm going to be having a morning coffee with Ohio Chairwoman of the Democratic Party, Liz Walters. And we'll be discussing more issues and what the Ohio State Democratic Party has going forward into the 2024 election. But
Awesome.
until then, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.